Every morning, just as the clock in Henry Collins' kitchen clicked over to 8, he put on his brown wool coat, checked that the buttons were properly fastened, and lifted his thermos from the counter. He didn't rush. Rushing, he had learned, was a young person's habit. Outside, the air usually carried a quiet chill, no matter the season. The kind of chill that reminded him he was still alive, still breathing, still part of the day. He locked the door carefully, once, then twice, and began the slow walk toward Riverside Park. It was only 6 blocks away, but Henry took his time. He passed the same houses he had passed for decades. Some were newly painted, others leaned slightly with age, like old men tired of standing straight. Trees lined the sidewalk, their branches stretching out like hands reaching for something they could never quite touch. When he arrived at the park, the river greeted him with its familiar murmur. Not loud, not demanding, just steady. Faithful. Henry's bench waited for him near the water, exactly where it had always been. Same bench, same view, same memories. He sat down carefully, adjusting himself until his back felt just right, and poured coffee into the lid of his thermos. Black, no sugar. Eleanor used to tease him about that. You drink it like you're being punished, she used to say. He smiled faintly at the thought. Henry had first sat on this bench in the spring of 1969, with Eleanor tucked close beside him. They were young then, so young they didn't realize it. Their fingers had been intertwined, knuckles brushing as they talked about nothing important and everything that mattered. Back then, the future felt wide open, like the river in front of them, long, winding, full of places they hadn't seen yet. Eleanor had worn a yellow dress that day. He remembered it clearly, the way it moved in the breeze, the way the sunlight caught in her hair, the way she leaned her head against his shoulder, as if it was the most natural thing in the world. They didn't have much money in those days. Henry worked long hours at the auto shop, hands always smelling faintly of oil and metal. Eleanor worked at the school library, coming home with stories about children and books and the quiet joy of order. Their apartment was small, their furniture mismatched, but laughter filled every corner. Years slipped by the way years always do, quietly, without asking permission. Children came. A son, then a daughter. Birthdays. School plays. Long nights of worry and longer days of pride. The bench became a tradition. Sundays after church, walks by the river, feeding the birds while Eleanor hummed songs Henry never quite recognized. As the children grew and moved away, the bench became theirs again. Their pace slowed. Conversations grew softer. Silence became comfortable. Then came the winter Eleanor didn't wake up. Henry remembered that morning with painful clarity, the way the room felt wrong before he even touched her shoulder. The way the air seemed to leave his chest all at once. The way time stopped caring about him entirely. After the funeral, people came and went. Neighbors brought casseroles. Family members spoke gently, carefully, as if he might break. But eventually the house emptied. And Henry was alone. The quiet was different now. Heavy, thick. It pressed against him from every direction. He found himself listening for Eleanor's footsteps, her voice, the sound of pages turning in the evening. That was when he started coming back to the bench. At first, he spoke to her out loud. Cold today, he'd say, wrapping his coat tighter. The river's high. I still don't like sugar in my coffee, sometimes he imagined her answers. Sometimes he just sat. Days blended into weeks. Weeks into months. The park changed with the seasons, but Henry remained. Rain or shine, heat or snow, the bench became his anchor. One afternoon in early autumn, someone sat at the far end of the bench. Henry noticed her shoes first, sensible, worn, carefully polished, then the paper bag in her hands. Mind if I feed the birds? She asked. Her voice was calm, kind. Henry shook his head slowly. They won't say no. She laughed softly and scattered breadcrumbs near their feet. Birds gathered almost instantly, bold and hopeful. My name's Margaret, she said after a while. Henry. They sat in silence for several minutes, watching the birds argue over crumbs like children squabbling over toys. I come here sometimes, Margaret said. Helps me remember I'm still part of the world. Henry nodded. That's why I come too. She didn't ask questions. That alone felt like a gift. Over the next few weeks, Margaret returned. Not every day, not on a schedule, but often enough that Henry began to notice when she wasn't there. She wore different coats, different scarves. Always the same quiet smile. Eventually, they began talking more. Margaret spoke of her husband, Thomas. 45 years together, a man who whistled while shaving and fell asleep during the evening news. She spoke of him without bitterness. Only longing. Henry spoke of Eleanor, the way she folded towels, the way she insisted on returning library books early, the way she laughed at jokes she already knew the ending to. I still feel guilty, Margaret admitted one evening. For laughing. Henry stared at the river. Me too. Do you think they'd mind? He thought for a long moment. I think they'd be upset if we didn't. That night, Henry moved Eleanor's photograph to the window. I made a friend today, he told it softly. I think you'd like her. As winter approached, Henry began bringing an extra cup. Margaret began bringing cookies. Their conversations deepened, but they never rushed. At their age, rushing felt unnecessary. Every moment carried weight. Every word mattered. Sometimes they talked about the past. Sometimes about the present. Rarely about the future. One day, Margaret reached for Henry's hand. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't sudden. It was gentle, as if she were asking permission. He didn't pull away. Life continued. The river kept flowing. The bench kept holding them. The park filled and emptied and filled again. Years later, people passing through Riverside Park noticed two elderly figures sitting together, sharing quiet words and warm coffee. Some days they laughed. Some days they simply watched the water. And sometimes, just sometimes, it felt as though they weren't alone at all. As if two other figures sat beside them, unseen but present, smiling softly, grateful that love had found a way to continue. Because love doesn't end. It waits. It remembers. And sometimes it begins again.